Like I said, today we're going to talk about Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilatus, that's how it's pronounced in Latin. This picture here will be up there. It'll make appearances because I'm going to talk about that picture a little bit and give you some insight, and hopefully that will have an effect on the way you see it after our discussion today. So we're going to see the mastery of the Word of God in the way of how it speaks through the ages, through this event. How many lessons there are that still apply today? So the obvious thing, most of us know who Pontius Pilate is, but I will give a quick snapshot if you don't. He was the Roman governor who served as the fifth prefect of the Roman province of Judea. That just means Rome ruled Judea. He was the governor put there to make sure things stay in order according to Roman law. That was between either 26 or 27 to 36 AD, roughly. That's when he was there. And he's best known for his part in the trial of the crucifixion of Jesus. He was appointed by the Roman Emperor Tiberius to govern that whole area. And that's the same area where Jesus was conducting his ministry, most of his ministry. So Pilate's responsibilities were just collecting taxes and making sure that Roman law was obeyed, because Jewish law, Roman took a place over. They'd let you self-govern afterwards. You could use your own laws, but it couldn't conflict with Roman law. Roman law was the golden rule, and he made sure that. And there was a lot of tension and conflict when he ruled there, because the Jewish population wanted to be independent. They resented Romans for being there, and who wouldn't? And he didn't handle things well. He didn't handle religious or political affairs well. There was a lot of unrest. This is bad for him, because if you can't control your area and it gets back to Emperor, to Caesar, you're in trouble. If you can't keep things running the way they should in your area. His most infamous decision came during the trial of Jesus, when the religious leaders accused Jesus of blasphemy and sedition, and they were out for blood. Pilate said, "I don't find any guilt in him. He hasn't done anything wrong." But they pressured him, and he caved, and he consented to Jesus' crucifixion, which is problematic for a few different reasons. But according to the gospel, he washed his hands. This is the most famous thing we know about Pilate. He washed his hands and said, "His blood's not on my hands. You're doing this. This is on your hands, because I didn't find any fault in him." He condemned him. He's remembered throughout history. This whole thing is a symbol of moral compromise, dereliction of duty, abuse of political power. His actions during the trial of Jesus have been studied and debated by theologians throughout history. And they raise questions about what we're talking about today: justice, morality, and personal responsibility. And on a side note, just so you know, in case you've ever heard anyone talk about this stuff, there are people, skeptics, who are constantly trying to tear down Christianity that actually will pose this question of whether Pilate existed or not. He certainly existed. There's ancient historians that wrote about him outside the Bible: Tacitus, Eusebius, Philo of Alexandria, Josephus. There's plenty of writing about him, and the skeptics got their last smack in the mouth in 1961 when they discovered, you can pull up slide 2, that stone. It's called the Pilate stone. It says, "This building, Tiberium," who was Tiberius, "by Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judah, has been built." Because when Roman governors or any Roman built something, they put their name on it. "Hey, I built this." And then they started finding his name on rings. So there is no dispute whether he existed. If anyone ever brings that up to you, don't engage in the argument. So now, we dive right into the scriptures. Here we go. This whole event. I'm going to jump from different books, because some of them are a little more expansive in what they explain. This is from John 18, 28 through 38. "Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium," that's the governor's palace. "Now it was early, and the Jews did not enter the praetorium, because they did not want to be ceremonially unclean, but they might be able to eat and participate in the feast of unleavened bread, which began after the Passover supper. So Pilate came out to them, and he asked, 'What accusation do you bring against this man?' And they answered, 'If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you for judgment.' And then Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves. Judge him according to your law." The Jews said, "We're not permitted to put anyone to death," which is true, because they were. God invented the death penalty. He instituted it in the Old Testament as a deterrent, and it was effective. And as Mosaic law went on, it was expanded to cover other sins. But we know Jesus came into the world, died for our sins. That stuff wasn't necessary. But at this time, the Jews, who didn't obviously acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God, they could invoke a death penalty, but not under Roman law. Romans, that was one of the golden rules. That's why they said that. It's called ius gladii. It means the right of the sword. No one decides who dies except for Rome, not you. And that was their whole problem. Well, we can't do it under our law because you won't let us kill him. So that's what that means. So back into this, continue this scripture. It says, "This was to fulfill the word which Jesus had spoken to indicate by what manner of death he was going to die." So Pilate went into the praetorium again and called Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replied, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" And Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own people and their chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done that is worthy of death?" And Jesus replied, "My kingdom is not of this world, nor does it have its origin in this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting hard to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this world." So Pilate said to him, "So then you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. This is why I was born. And for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth, who is a friend of the truth and belongs to the truth, hears and listens carefully to my voice." Pilate said to him scornfully, "What is truth?" And when he had this, he went out to the Jews again, and he told them, "I find no guilt in him, no crime, no cause for accusation." Okay, so this is when the Jews start to scare him and play head games with him to make him afraid, and he start to worry about what the emperor is going to think of him. And they start telling him, "Listen, if you don't release him, you're allowing someone to call themselves a king, and that stands in opposition to Caesar, and you're breaking the law if you do that, because then you're a rebel." And then he starts getting rattled. He starts getting rattled thinking about what they're saying, and he caves. And in Matthew 27, 22 through 25 says, Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, called the Christ?" And they replied, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What has he done that's evil?" But they continued shouting all the later, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water, he washed his hands to clean himself of the guilt so the crowd could see him, and said, "I'm innocent of his blood. See to that yourselves." And they all answered, "Let it be our responsibility. Let his blood be on us and our children." Fine, we'll take it. Wow, okay. There's a lot happening there. So what can we learn from Pilate? You can put up that slide 3 now. These are the outlines we're going to cover. The first 3 are the mistakes. This is what we can learn from Pilate. His decisions and actions move as cautionary tales. They're profound lessons, really, for all believers. The first one is the temptation of expediency, and I put the scripture references right there. When Pilate faced temptation, he put, "Just get this over with. Just do what you got to do. Are you a king? No. All right. Listen, you deal with him. Here, I'm done. You just go." Just wants to rush through this. Get it over with. That's what he did. That's what expediency means. He prioritized that over justice. In seeking to appease the crowds to maintain political stability, what did he do? He compromised his principles. He said he was innocent. He said he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. We want to kill him anyway. Fine, whatever, kill him. Do whatever you want. Hands him over. The second one, the dangers of moral relativism. Now, moral relativism, for those of you who don't use that phrase a whole lot, is That just means that a group or culture or segment of people, to them, they say, well, we have our truth. This is our morality. I got in a heated argument with a liberal professor I had in school. He said, when you go somewhere where they have a set of rules, you have to respect them, even if you disagree morally, because that's moral relativism. And the example he gave was a tribe in Africa where the guys would go hunting and come back, be rewarded from the hunt, and have pleasure with the young brides. They called them, they were 12-year-olds, girls. And he said, is that wrong? I said, yeah, that's wrong. He said, according to you, according to our culture. I said, no, according to any culture, that's wrong. And he said, but not in their culture. They're raised and taught that. So I said, no, it is wrong because we know that the brain doesn't connect sexual pleasure and sexual intimacy with any level of maturity to the emotional response required. There's a disconnect. A child can't process that type of a relationship. They can't do it. So it's not my opinion. It's a fact. It's wrong. And he said, well, when you're in their culture, and then, we just eventually just stopped. We couldn't agree on it. And I was really frosted about that because I could not go someplace where they did something like that and say, well, it's what they do. I would either have to say something or not go there, not go to that place. And that's moral relativism. You're there, hey, when in Rome. No. If you go through your life living that way and you claim you're a Christian, you shouldn't do that. So the dangers of moral relativism, he exemplified moral relativism by succumbing to public pressures. And listen to that tone of my voice. It's like I'm still mad at the printer. I just realized I sound like one of those guys who'll tell, oh, you're trying to calm down. No more Hewlett-Packards for me. All right. Pilate exemplified moral relativism by succumbing to public pressure and shifting blame to others. Despite recognizing Jesus' innocence, he washed his hands and allowed the injustice to proceed. And the last one is the power of fear and indecision. I'm not going to read all this, but I'm going to read the first part from John 19, 12 through 16. As a result of this, Pilate kept making efforts to release him, but the Jews kept screaming, if you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who makes him out to be a king opposes Caesar and rebels against the emperor. That's the head games they were playing with him. Making him feel like, hey, what's people going to think of you back in Rome? So his fear of political repercussions and loss of power paralyzed them from taking a stand for truth and righteousness. They wouldn't stand up for it. His indecision and his failure to act with courage led to the injustice of Jesus' crucifixion. So the last two are the lessons. Going to start this one off, the call to stand for truth and justice. There's tons of biblical support, but Proverbs 21:3 is pretty plain. To do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice for wrongs repeatedly committed. So as followers of Christ, we have to stand for truth and justice, even in the face of opposition and adversity. And one of the things that prompted this lesson was the way the world is now, and because we so often find ourselves in situations where it's hard to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and yes, this is right. You don't have to take him out of here. That's just the signs of life. No, So we have to also resist the allure of expediency and moral compromise, and trust in God's sovereignty and righteousness. And that last bullet point there is the most important one. The importance of personal responsibility. And I've got 2 scriptures to read about that. Anything you do in life, these should be hung on a post-it in the back of your head. Romans 14:12. So then each of us will give an account of himself to God. Galatians 6:7 through 8. Incidentally, I'm reading everything from the Amplified Bible, which is a more accurate translation than the King James, because the Greek language is more expansive and the Amplified Bible compensates for that. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. He will not allow himself to be ridiculed nor treated with contempt, nor allow his precepts to be scornfully set aside. For whatever a man sows, this and only this is what he will reap. For the one who sows to his flesh, his sinful capacity, his worldliness, his disgraceful impulses, he'll reap from the flesh ruin and destruction. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. So now we know we're accountable for our actions and the decisions we make before God. Regardless of what, and this is the thing, regardless of what external circumstances are, regardless of how people try to pressure us, of what they tell us. Like Pilate, we have to take ownership of our choices. We have to align our lives with God's truth and righteousness. That's the golden rule, the importance of personal responsibility. If we follow that, then we know within our responsibilities are to follow to the letter what Christ said. So, to wind this out, it's not over yet. Don't get excited. The story of Pontius Pilate serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of moral compromise. Not only that, but making decisions based on fear and the temptation to just get through this, expediency over justice. That's why our legal system, as bad as it is so slow. Because we designed a legal system that is going to leave, supposedly, no stone unturned. We're going to check every single thing. You can't just, there's a million times, I'm sure, that people would have liked to go, look at him, he looks guilty. He smells like Bush Light, and it's just, no, him, get him out of here. He did it, he's guilty. People use that. Racists use that. That kind of thinking is wrong. It's a powerful thing to accuse somebody of something. So it challenges us to examine our own hearts, not use expediency just to get through something. As we reflect on Pilate's role in the crucifixion, what we do have to do is look at how Jesus handled it. Courage, integrity, unwavering commitment, stands before him to bear witness to what? The truth, righteousness. You can pull that service slide back up. I want to talk about that for a second. I really want to talk about this picture. Okay, now I don't want to bore anyone, but I want you to think about this when you see this. I went to art school, and in art school, you spend weeks talking about these paintings sometimes, because it's back then, that was 1871. They didn't have TVs or radios. You'd put a painting. It was about a quarter the size of that wall. That's how big a lot of these paintings are. You see pictures of them on the internet, and you think they're probably as big as a poster. They're not. They're massive. So people would gather and stare at them for hours, and every detail is a brushstroke. So there's not one single thing. Like a photograph, there's a lot of things that's insignificant. In a painting from 1871, there's nothing in the picture that is insignificant. Everything is insignificant. Everything is significant, and everything was with purpose, and everything is there for a reason. And just looking at this, you go, wow, that's a really talented painter. But there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's by a guy named Antonio Cesare, and it's called Ecce Homo, which means behold the man. Now, that title comes from John 19, 4 through 6, where it says, Pilate went out again, and he said to them, behold, I'm bringing him out to you, so you will know that I find no guilt in him. And then Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said to them, behold the man. And that is why that title, that is called that. And it is this moment in time, in this picture, because there's points to make in this picture about this message. I'm not just showing it so you can see a cool picture. The reason we're addressing this is because, interestingly, it's depicted from the back. The painting is depicted from the back instead of the front. And what that does to the viewer, what the intention it is to do to the viewer, is to make you feel like a participant. You are a participant. You're not seeing this from the front. And what's even more interesting is that whose side are you on from where you're sitting? Pilate's. You're in Pilate's praetorium balcony. So you're seeing this from the back. So you are an active participant, and you're looking at this, and it should start to convict you. Incidentally, that's Pilate's wife right there, the one turning away. Because in the Bible it tells us she had bad dreams about Jesus, about this, the whole thing, and she went to him and said, to Pilate, she said, don't have anything to do with this. I have a bad feeling about what she called this man. Stay away from this situation. He can't do that. He can't do that. He's the governor. He's got to be involved in this situation. And as we're going to explore a little bit, when people can't make a decision between what's right, they usually just don't make one. And that's tragic. because then something happens to them. So here he is, not knowing what to do. We're participants from the viewpoint of this painting. And we're looking at Pilate, repeatedly saying, I find no guilt in him, yet he hands him over to be crucified. His mistake was to ignore truth, to ignore Jesus, and just get on with his life. If I'm looking at this, I don't think there's anything on either side that's going to make me feel righteous. In the Bible, she warned him. Pilate couldn't do that. He couldn't listen to her warning. And now here we are. So in the famous words of Pilate, do we not face the same question in our lives? What then shall I do with Jesus? That's the question. I give into expediency. Yeah, it's a cool thing. I like talking about Jesus. He was a good guy. He was a good teacher. Sound like he was a really good person. You know, that's cool, man. I'm with you, but I got to roll. I got to get past this to my next thing. Expediency. Or do I cave into moral relativism? You do you, bro. I'm me, you do you. You pro-choice, whatever, man. Hey, just cool, whatever. That's your thing, bro. Not me. But hey, we're good, man. We're good like that, right? So we're cool. We're still cool. Moral relativism. Or cave into fear and indecision. You know, I don't know. It's just church and all that kind of stuff. It's not, like, that's not really what I do. Like my friends, my parents weren't like church people. People might get weirded out and then just kind of roll on, move on, mix that with the expediency. Contextually speaking to this specific event, Pilate did all that stuff. That's why the sermon was called Portrait of Weakness. He did all that stuff. Just get on with it. Just get on with it. What do you Jews want? Kill him. I don't care. Look, hey, I didn't have anything to do with it, okay? All right? That's what he did. So when we're faced with what shall I do with Jesus, we accept the last two lessons. We stand for truth, justice, and accept personal accountability. Boldly embrace Christ. And it's not the only... Accepting Christ isn't just a mandate to the Christian, but it's the only hope we have to impact the world around us. It's the only hope we have to change the world. What then will I do with Jesus? Now, that was supposed to be the end of the message. And it can still be. And let me explain myself. When I wrote this sermon, I was also writing something to couple with it for a men's conference. That's only for men, that I've been working on for a while. It's not going to be done for a while, but I kept looking at that on my computer screen, these additional notes, because it was how World War II aligns with events of the Bible and what men can learn from it. And when I come out here, I thought, man, I should really talk about that stuff. But I thought, you know what, the sermon's at an end now. And then I said, yeah, but this shows how those principles affect humanity in the 20th century. You need to say it. So I started really struggling. I've never done this before as a pulpit. Well, I'm going to do it now. So I'm going to ask you, if you want me to tell you this part now, to raise your hands. And if you just want to end it and pray and go home, raise your hands. So who would like to hear this part? Okay, who would like to just go home? You see how easy it is for one man to get everyone to bend to my will? I just got a whole room full of people to bend to my will. I'm just kidding. So this isn't polished, but I'm going to make the points I made. The point was to address this. Well, how does this stuff happen? I mean, I get all the points, man. Philosophically, this is great. As far as morals and integrity and loving Christ, this is great. But show me some results. Where does walking away from these principles manifest itself in the real world? If I abandon those principles, where does it... Give me an example. Okay, I got one. It's from World War II. Because, why? What is it with this pastor in World War II? It's because it's where we witness the extremes in humanity. We see men who push the limits of self-sacrifice to do what's right, And we also see the darkest parts of men who cave in because they won't stand up for what's right. In his book called Ordinary Men, a writer named Christopher R. Browning wanted to know why German soldiers who were regular people like us, plumbers, electricians, bankers, business owners, that signed up to fight as patriots for their country, could go out and murder civilians. How can this happen? He wanted to know. So a few decades he spent gathering all the papers from the Nuremberg trials, the prosecution, the defense, the letters from the inmates, the letters from the German soldiers home, everything he could. And he compiled this book, and he left no stone unturned. The men who enlisted were normal people. Could you put up slide 4? Okay, that guy in the middle was the major. His name's Wilhelm Trupp. He was the major over the 101st Battalion, German soldiers. He was well-liked. He was not an authoritarian. He was a humble guy. He's like, he wasn't hard on people. His guys loved him. They called him Papa Trupp because of the term of affection. They respected him, they looked up to him, and they couldn't wait to serve him as patriots fighting for their country. So, under his command, they get the battalion together. This is in July 13th, 1942, the next slide. This is it. He has to address his battalion, and he looks different than this time because he has tears coming down his face. They're like, what's wrong with him? Papa Troop. And he stands there and he tells the battalion, and this is what he says to them. I have a terrible order to give you today. And his hands were shaking. And he told these men, this battalion, they were to execute 1,500 unarmed civilian men, women, and children. And they were in disbelief. And he was in disbelief. He didn't know what to do. He's a major in the German army. These guys signed up to be patriots. A lot of guys in this room would go fight for our country if we had to. Can you imagine standing in front of a major of an entire battalion telling you this? And you're going, what? And then he said, if anyone is unable in this rank and file to do this, step out of line now. Remember what I said a little bit ago? When people can't tell right from right, they usually don't make a decision. One guy stepped out, and his immediate commanding officer started to berate him on the spot. Troops stepped down and went down and defended the guy. Get off of him. After they saw the major do that, a dozen other German soldiers said, I'm not doing this. And they stepped out of line too in that particular company. There we go, abandoning us. They just walked out. It was discovered, this is what's important. This is what I want you to know. That they didn't have to do it if they didn't want to, and it is a lie and a myth, and there is no proof that any German soldier was ever told, if you don't do it, you'll be killed. Not true, and there's no documentation of that. The only thing that would happen is that you'd get a write-up in your file. Hey, he wouldn't do this. And then the other soldier, how they punished you was they made you stay with that company because they called you rat and sissy, and you had to do all the dirtiest jobs. You had to stay with them, and that was social rejection and persecution under your mates. And you had to stay with them. You weren't punished anymore. You didn't get shot. I'm sure they did things to you that they probably shouldn't have done. There was the only repercussions they faced were on paper. In Hamburg, and Battalion 101 arrives at their first execution. And when they get to the first execution, they were informed again, there's going to be women and children here, and you need to shoot them at point blank range. And they were walking them into the woods, and they were talking with them, nervous conversation, to break the silence. The Jews were terrified because they knew they were going to be killed. The German soldiers were upset because they knew they were about to commit murder. So one of these guys, was talking to a guy who was his theater, owned a movie theater where he grew up and went to watch movies. And he realized that when he's walking to him, he's got to shoot this guy. He's getting ready to kill him. So they get out there. And incidentally, I want to say, just before I go on with this story, the American soldiers, even to this day, I don't care how bad boys get in trouble, typical American boys, the American men of any soldier or of our military service, first of all, they don't like being called our kids. Our kids are in harm's way. If you talk to a Marine, he would tell you, I am harm's way. I mean, they're not scared. When the Americans are fighting, they're talking about the enemy. They're talking about, let's get them, let's get this over with, let's win and go home. But these guys are infected because now they're not patriots fighting an enemy. They're murderers, and they're mass murderers. And there's a difference. I know war crimes go on in every theater from every side, but not in this capacity, not in World War II, and except for these Germans. So they're walking them out to the woods, and they're getting ready to do the deed. Who was experiencing a lot of fear 20 years later said, I was angry because we had become animals. We had become murderers. And he's right. They had become animals and murderers. You can pull up that last slide. When they got out there, they were afraid, like when we refuse to stand with Christ, we bow to the enemy's will. Another soldier said, looking back, he thought, we don't have enough soldiers to kill this many people or enough land to bury this many people. And as soon as they were done, the German soldiers, most of them were vomiting because of what they had just done. And when I say when we refuse Christ and we bow to the enemy's will, you're probably like, well, that's not going to make me kill somebody, man. Come on. I'm not a murderer. I wonder if you talked to these guys a day before they got their orders and you asked them if they were a murderer, what they would say. Come on. No, man. Not a murderer. I'm going to fight for a country. But the Bible tells us all paths lead to murder. In John 8:44, what's it say about Satan? He was a murderer from the beginning. There's no truth in him. That's where all the paths lead. So if you're thinking these men that pulled the trigger were Jew-hating Nazis, they weren't. Most of them weren't. They were electricians. They were plumbers. They were mechanics. They were normal Joes. Like I said, bankers, business owners, everybody in a community that makes it tick. The gears of life. That's who they were. They didn't even agree with all these politics, but what'd they do? Man, they fell in line with orders. Why? To move on with their lives. Expediency. Get it done. Just get it over with and move forward, man. That's what Pilate did. Whatever. Kill him. I don't care. I got to go. Get it done. Do what you got to do. That's what they did. Expediency. Many of them got so used to doing it. The vomiting stopped because they started to care more about what other people thought about them than they did about the lives they were taking. And this is how poison comes into your life. You get used to doing something. You do it over and over. You warm up to it. Yeah, it ain't so bad. Not such a big deal. That's what happens. It affects how you think, and it affects on what you become accustomed to thinking is acceptable. They got out there. That guy, we can't kill this many people. What do we do with all these Jews? Well, I mean, what then do we do with Jesus? It's too bad Major Troop couldn't have asked himself that. I know in the United States, I have enough faith in our military that I really think that if you went to any branch of the United States military and you ordered a bunch of men to execute unarmed civilians, I think there would be a coup. I think they would, just knowing what I know and my buddies that are in the military, I think enough of them would stand up and go, hey, we got to do something because we can't go out and shoot people in ditches. Kids and moms, there's something that's got to happen. I mean, I don't think they would do that. Like Pilate, these German soldiers' actions were a combination of coercion and free will. Getting coaxed into it, getting scared into it, basically being a punk. That's the word, a punk. You're afraid. You can't stand up for what's right. Be a man. I just want to get through this. I don't want to catch any flack from my boss. I don't want these people not to like me. I'm having a hard enough time here. Just kill him. Do what you got to do. I didn't do it. You did it. Right. In every life situation, we have to surrender all free will to a path of Christ, or we can get on the path to the enemy camp. I'm on the last page. A lot of them pressured each other by saying, listen, we got to kill these guys, and if you don't join us, then you're a rat. You're a sissy. We don't like doing it either. And that's how they would pressure. But the guys who wouldn't do it. Just like Jesus, ridiculed for the sake of righteousness. And like I said, social rejection amongst your peers is hard, especially in warfare, when you have to live and depend on each other, and you're considered a rat or a sissy or a punk. They had to live in those conditions. Like Jesus said, you'll be hated by everyone because of me. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Many people would rather experience physical punishment and just take a beating and go through ongoing. You have to be very self-assured to endure that, the kind of self-assuredness that only comes from Christ. Because following Jesus not only saves us, it keeps us from, listen to me, following Christ not only saves us, it keeps us from becoming monsters ourselves. That's important. And I repeat every day that we should ask ourselves, what then shall I do with Jesus? In light of eternal accountability, it all comes back to the theme I initially announced: justice, morality, personal responsibility. I face everything while standing for Christ. And every day when my feet hit the floor, regarding everything we discussed in this room today, I have to ask myself, what then shall I do with Jesus? That's depressing. Put the other slide back up. Amen. All right.